Hi guys, welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School. I'm really excited about today's video because this is the compilation of something that I've been working on for a really long time. And right now it's April, and then we have the whole month of May basically left in our school year and just a couple of days in March. So I think that I'm probably going to be teaching this unit for most of the rest of the school year. This will basically be our last unit of the school year. In 2 weeks, we're switching into like a concurrent model. So some kids will be in the classroom, some kids will be at home. They're still meeting at the same time and still working together and still working in groups. So I don't know how all of that is gonna work exactly, but I think that these literature circles that we're gonna be doing will actually be a really good little structure for, you know, moving into this kind of weird model that none of us have done before. So this unit that we're going to be doing is a literature circles unit, all based around fantasy books. And the inspiration for this unit was a book called The Dark Fantastic by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas. And that book is so good. I've talked about it a couple of times on this channel at this point, but it really just changed the way that I looked at fantasy. And I've never really seen English teachers use fantasy books as like an academic text. Almost always when I do a novel study or lit circles, it's maybe like a historical fiction book. That seems to be the most common, or just, you know, some kind of a classic, but it's just like very rooted in the real world. I think so that you're able to like make connections to the real world and maybe like make connections to history and just kind of like get a little bit more academic use out of the novel. That's what I would have said up until 6 months ago or so when I read The Dark Fantastic. And after just reading about like the theory of fantasy and how that genre can be used, I want to see it in schools more. So that's why I'm really excited to be doing it in my classroom. So there were a couple of things that I just like wasn't seeing before. Fantasy isn't really the genre that I lean towards when I read today, but when I think about middle school, that was when Harry Potter was coming out, like my middle school and high school years. And I did stay up all night reading those books. I got really lost in the world. And then even today, 20 years later, for millennials, that's like our thing. Like we know all the little ins and outs of Harry Potter and like the features of the different houses, like, oh, you're totally a Hufflepuff or whatever. Like it really brings like generations of people together. And it's definitely a genre that sparks willing participation outside of just reading the book. Like people start writing fan fiction and people go on Tumblr, you know, and talk about these books and theorize about different aspects of the magic and the characters and the world. And I just don't really see that in other genres. Like I think there is something really special about fantasy. So whether it was The Lord of the Rings, you know, there's definitely a whole generation or group of people that were like really into Lord of the Rings, or Harry Potter, or, you know, my kids like the Percy Jackson series, Game of Thrones, which I still haven't seen, but you know, millions of adults read the books, watch the series. It's something that people get really into, and it's a little bit more open to interpretation and discussion, and it really is a way to reimagine the future. And it's a little bit different, I would say, than like dystopia. A lot of my kids are also into dystopia, and you know, with like Hunger Games and Maze Runner and all of that. Like those got really popular as well. And what a lot of this like young adult fantasy and young adult dystopia has in common is that, like, you know, these underdog, unqualified, unexpected teenagers tend to be the ones that end up saving the world or like solving all the problems or whatever. So I think they do have that in common, but where fantasy is a little bit different is that it does involve magic, and we can really like do away with the rules that we don't want to have to follow and reimagine what life could be like without the confines of of whatever it is that the writer decides they want to write about. I would argue that fantasy is based in the real world. Like, all of the themes of fantasy and the things that they're trying to fix and like the villains that they're trying to overcome are based on something in reality, but through this fantastical story, authors and readers are reimagining new ways of doing that. So even though, you know, usually like historical fiction, realistic fiction is more my thing, I get it now, I think. I understand the value of fantasy, and I'm really excited about it. And since it's the thing that most of my students read willingly anyway, and will like stay up all night under the covers, you know, reading just one more chapter of, and it's the thing that they'll like talk about with friends who have also read those stories, this seems just like the perfect thing to read in class. During this year when, you know, it's a little bit harder to get engagement from students because they're behind a screen, why not use something that they're much more willing to be involved in and to participate in? So anyway, that's like the rationale behind this unit and the reason why I'm so excited about it. I have a separate video reviewing all of the books that I chose. So while, like we said, you know, a lot of the classics are like Lord of the Rings, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, we're not truly reimagining the future if all of the characters look exactly the same and have the same background. So this is coming from Ebony Elizabeth Thomas's book, The Dark Fantastic. So we need to also allow this space where like there are no rules and we're able to reimagine everything and allow anybody to be a hero. Okay, then we should have some heroes that look a little bit different, right? So that was very top of mind for me when I was choosing the books to include in these literature circles. So with all of the materials that I'm going to show you, you can use any fantasy book. You could use Harry Potter if you wanted to. You could use Percy Jackson. You can use whatever you want. But I think the point of fantasy is to allow us to reimagine different people and different methods and different magic and different like mythological stories informing how we solve problems in the future. So I was very intentional about choosing stories that did that. So in this unit that I'll be linking below, the 6 books that I chose for 8th grade English students are Elatsoe, The House in the Cerulean Sea, Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky, Woven in Moonlight, A Song Below Water, and Charlie Hernandez and the League of Shadows. Again, you can get a more in-depth review of all of those books in the other video, which I will link below. But in this unit, I've also just included a little summary of each of the books so that if you do decide to just go ahead and use these 6, which I have vetted for middle school classrooms, these are all, you know, appropriate, super well written, like these are going to be great books for your classroom. I've already vetted these and provided you with like a summary for them that you could show to your students while they choose which one they would like to read. They vary in length, they vary in reading level. I think Elatsoe is probably the highest reading level, and then Tristan Strong and Charlie Hernandez are a little bit on the upper elementary to early middle school side. So you've got books for everybody with a diverse array of protagonists and worlds that they can choose from. And then if you find other fantasy books that you would like to, you know, swap in, swap out, that's fine. I think next year, I'm already really liking this one. I like Gods of Jade and Shadow. I might swap this one for Woven in Moonlight. I haven't decided yet. And then I also haven't been able to find a good, like very magical fantasy book that has an Asian protagonist. All of the ones that I read were either really more geared towards adults and not really, you know, YA, or they just really didn't have a magical element in them. And you can choose books that don't have magic in them. It's just that like whatever 5, 6, 7 books that you choose as options, you want them to all have some kind of a unifying theme so that the questions that you pose to your students are able to be answered with all of these books. So the questions that I put in this unit really do depend on the book being based a little bit more in magic rather than just kind of like dystopia. It's more of their magic. So, okay, anyway, I have also included teacher instructions for you, so you can definitely just read through those and get a sense of how to teach this unit. I just also wanted to provide this video, first of all, just to like explain like my excitement behind fantasy and why I think we should be using fantasy in schools much more often, and then to just like give you a little bit more in-depth explanation of how to do some of the techie stuff. Since I had initially designed this to be for virtual classrooms, but you could totally do this in person as well. They would just like keep track of all of their work in a digital format, which, you know what, is easier now. I think I'm just gonna do that forever. Like I think I've gone paperless after this 2020-2021 school year. Okay, so you get a teacher deck, and this is what you will teach with. You could turn this into like a Nearpod deck or a Pear Deck or something like that and make it like a little bit more interactive, but this is just your starting place. So of course, first of all, kids have to pick a story, and I have given my kids like 2 months notice, and we started talking about these books, I want to say in like January. I gave them a heads up, like these are the books that we're going to be reading, and it'll depend, you know, on each individual teacher and each individual school, how they're gonna get these books. I contacted our school library and asked them to get several copies of each of these books. I contacted our local library. I got a couple $100s worth of grants, and I bought a bunch of them. I also just used some of my own money to buy quite a few of them, and then I just let parents know like, hey, if you can spend $8.99 on this novel for your kid, that would also be awesome if you are able to. And so I provided links to everything. You know, ebooks are fine. Those end up being pretty affordable. And then just if any kid wasn't able to get the book, I just bought it for them and just left it in the office and they could come pick it up. So it's a little bit harder since, you know, I've never met these kids in person, and I was like trying to figure out how to get everybody their book. But it seems like at this point, after several months of talking about this a lot in class, I think every kid has access to a book now. So that's great. So step one, do whatever you need to do to get your kids books, you know, do a donor's choose, apply for a grant, something like that. You could just have a class set if you wanted to. I guess that's a little bit harder now with like COVID. Like maybe we're not all supposed to be like touching the same books every period or whatever. I don't know. So it just depends, I guess. But that's really the hardest part. Okay, so then they're gonna break up into groups just based on which book they chose. This also takes just quite a bit of work on your part, just because you've gotta divide up your kids and figure out how many kids you want per group. And then if there's like a kid who chose a book that nobody else chose and they're like in a group by themselves, then you have to ask them like, okay, do you want to switch books and like be with these kids, or should I just like put you in another group and, you know, you're reading this one and they're reading a different one, but that's okay. You guys still just like talk about them together. Those are the things that, you know, you just got to figure out for lit circles. I kept my groups to a maximum of 5. Some of my groups only have like 2 kids in them, but it's like 2 friends and they, you know, really wanted to read the same book and be in the same group. There are some kids who like rarely come to online classes, and so I just made sure to put them in like a larger group. I'm hoping that this will draw them into class and help them to participate more, but just in case they continue on the track of not really showing up, I don't want their whole group to fall apart. So, you know, I put them with kids who do tend to show up. So all of those things you got to consider. There are 5 group roles. So a discussion leader, a note taker, a speaker, a text specialist, and then the tech and design person. So if there are 5 kids in the group, they can each just have one job. If there are fewer students than that, somebody can have more than one job. As long as each job is accounted for, that's fine. If somebody wants to take on more than one thing, that's great. If 2 people want to be the speaker and like alternate days, and then 2 people are also the discussion leader and they alternate days or whatever, it doesn't matter to me. So again, I have 8th graders, and so at this point they're fairly good at like figuring that kind of stuff out and holding each other accountable, but you know, you do have to be there to help problem solve and stuff. So the teacher deck starts with some information about fantasy. So if we're going to do this fantasy unit, we do need to teach our students about the features of fantasy. Like, we're still meeting all of our Common Core standards, we're meeting literature standards, we're meeting speaking standards, writing standards, reading standards. We can do all of that with fantasy. So I have links for you where you can get more information in like the speaker notes section, and then these slides are editable if there's anything that you want to change. But this gives you like a good place to start, just talking about some of the common themes in fantasy, some of the classic books, which again, maybe your students will start to notice are not very diverse in their protagonists and worlds. And so you can talk about that and talk about, you know, the advantages of having this genre where you can do whatever you want. Like, we might as well fill it with different types of characters, but that's going to require different types of authors, right? And for publishing companies to take on the books of these different types of authors, and for publishing companies to have faith in readers that we are going to buy those books and be interested in them. And so, you know, you can get into all of those discussions if you want to, if your kids are into that kind of stuff. I think they'll pick up on that pretty quickly. So yeah, you know, ask them if they have read any of those classic fantasy books, ask them what some of their favorites are. So you can build on these slides and like have discussions with your students. You know, maybe they can think of some more advantages of fantasy books. I've got some Ebony Elizabeth Thomas quotes in here from The Dark Fantastic, where she talks about the imagination gap. So if fantasy is supposed to be so imaginative, why does it all look the same, you know? So anyway, you don't have to like harp on that too much, but I think students get excited about being kind of subversive and like, all right, yeah, let's do something different than from, you know, how people have always done it. Let's read some different books. Let's think about different ways that we can use fantasy. If they haven't read too many stories with protagonists that look like them and sound like them and have families like them, then, you know, maybe they'll be a little bit more excited to read. Most of the rest of the slides are the question for the day or the question for the week, kind of depending on how your schedule is set up right now. I know my schedule's like a little bit weird, and how much time your kids are gonna have to work together. So the first question is, what is the main character's goal, their obstacle, their plan of resolution, and what will happen if they fail? So it does help if students have read most of the book by the time they start these fantasy literature circles. That's what I've asked my students to do. So we're not really going through the book for comprehension. So the questions that I've written aren't comprehension questions based on each novel. This is analysis. So they will grow in comprehension as they talk about the book together, and different people with their different perspectives, you know, bring up different things that they noticed. But that comprehension is going to lead them into analysis. And so that's why you're able to just kind of like switch out any fantasy book that you want to use. Okay, so you have your question on your slide, and you will pose that question, maybe give them some tips for answering it, maybe use something well-known like Harry Potter or whatever as an example to talk about how to answer that question. And then they're going to go into their groups and start working on it together. In my case, they're going to go into breakout rooms, and I have lists posted on Google Classroom for each period of like which group is which number, and then I just choose that number of breakout rooms, and I have the setting so that they choose the breakout room that they go into. So, you know, they'll get into their breakout room group. If you're in person, then they just, you know, huddle up or whatever with the people in their group. Now, you also have breakout room templates, and these are a little bit tricky to get started with, but once you do it, you will never go back. I love breakout rooms now because I have figured out, you know, just how to use templates and watch everybody like a god while they work on their templates in breakout rooms. So for example, you've got this slide number 1 that goes with the first question that you are posing. So what you're gonna do with this slide is just like click on it to highlight it. All of these instructions are in the folder in the teacher instructions. You're gonna do File, Make a Copy of Selected Slides. So now you're gonna have a new file with just this one slide in it. You're gonna duplicate that slide for as many groups as you have. So let's say you have 8 groups in this class period. You're gonna duplicate it so that you have 8. Now before you share it with any one class period. If you have more than one class period, now you also need to make a copy of that entire presentation for however many class periods you have. And I don't know what that is going to be for each individual teacher, so I couldn't do that for you, but this is a pretty quick process, like once you have it down. Like, just, this is how I lesson plan now. Rather than going down to like the copy machine room or anything, I just have to like sit there, click a couple times, make a couple of digital copies, and then I'm ready to teach the next day. So now I have this new slides presentation. Let's say it's for like second period. So I will share this whole Google slide deck with my second period class. If you share it through Google Classroom, it's initially not editable, which is fine. I changed the settings at the last second so that all the students can edit it. So if you share it through Google Classroom, then it knows all of the people who should have editing access, like all of the kids who are enrolled in the class. So then that just makes it really easy. So I give them editing access at the last second. Then they go into breakout rooms for however long you've decided that, you know, they get for this part of the activity. And so now for you, in the bottom left-hand side, there's like 3 rectangles. That's how you normally have your Google Slides setting. This is the film strip view. But then right next to that, there's grid view with the 6 little squares. So click on that, and then you can see every group's slide as they're working on it. This is great because, you know, I usually give them like a few minutes to get started. I don't really bug them, but then like after a few minutes, you know, a few groups will start like typing some stuff in there. And if there's one group that has done nothing's showing up on their slide, then I'll go into that breakout room, and inevitably, you know, their cameras have been turned off, nobody's mic is on, and I'm like, hello, everyone. Okay, so cameras need to be on for this part. This is up to you, but I don't require cameras to be on for like my teaching, but when they are in breakout rooms, I want their cameras to be on while they're working together. They need to be respectful to each other and be talking and have their microphone on when they're discussing and everything. So that's my expectation. They should be doing that in these small breakout rooms. So then just find out if they need help. Are they stuck on something? What's going on? Hopefully you can kind of get them back on track. Pop out of the breakout room, look at these Google Slides again, like, oh, okay, this group is writing stuff, but they're actually kind of going off in the wrong direction. Let me jump into that breakout room, kind of get them back on track. Then maybe notice like, oh wow, like group 3 is doing an excellent job on their slides. I use Zoom, so in Zoom you can like send a message to everybody. So sometimes I'll be like, check out slide 3, this is exactly the direction everybody should be going, and everyone can see everybody else's slides. But since they've all read a different book for the most part, I mean, there might be a couple of groups that have the same book, they're just split into 2 groups. It's fine if they see what the other groups are writing, especially if that kind of like helps them and helps them figure out how to get back on track. So, I mean, for me, I still haven't quite figured out the timing. I think I might give them like 1 day of the week to just work in breakout rooms, and then maybe like the next day when we come back together, do all of the presentations. I don't know, I need to figure out how much time this takes. So like potentially this unit could take like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I don't know, it just depends on how fast you go and like how many times per week you meet. Like we used to meet 5 times a week. Now it's 2 and it's gonna be 3. It's just all very weird. So it's good that this is so like adaptable. You can just kind of like, everything is already there. You can speed up or slow down depending on how things are going. So now you as the teacher, once you bring everybody back together, you can just share each slide. And I have a list of all of the groups and who is the speaker in that group and everything. So I can share slide 1 and be like, okay, Emily is the speaker for slide 1. So can you guys tell us about your book and the main character's goal, their obstacle, what they lose if they fail, whatever. So then, you know, I can call on each group and have each group present. And if somebody's absent or whatever, someone's gonna need to take over those jobs. But, you know, all of this stuff is good practice for them to get used to working together as a team, and maybe everything is not always divided evenly. The work is not necessarily always perfectly split up. Sometimes you just do what you're good at, and you just do what you're good at, and we come together and all of our strengths equal the task got done. So I don't know. I'm not too concerned with like keeping really close tabs on every single group member and making sure that every single group has evenly divided tasks. I don't know. If some kids are struggling a little bit more, but some kids are like awesome at this, I want them in the same group together so that those kids who are like really passionate about this story and can talk about it forever, you know, can kind of like bring those kids along who are struggling a little bit and maybe not contributing as much to the group, but maybe after a couple of weeks, they will feel more comfortable doing that. So anyway, that's why there's not like, I don't know, structures within here to make sure that everybody is pulling their weight, because I don't know. I just don't care about that as much. But I mean, if there are serious issues with kids just like doing nothing, they'll email you. The other group members will email you and let you know, and then just deal with that however you deal with that. Okay, there are also group slides, and so you're gonna have to just like make copies. Actually, no, that would be too hard. You're just gonna send this file, this slide deck, I'm gonna send it to the tech and design person. And you're gonna set it up so that you force a copy. And I've linked a video that shows you how to do that. And if you don't like that video, you can just like Google how to force a copy of a Google Slides presentation. So when that student gets it, it'll say like, make a copy of whatever that file is called, and they'll say yes. And then they're just gonna share it with their own group. So everybody in that group will have editing access to their group deck. And this will be one of the first things that you do. So they're learning a lot of like tech skills as they're collaborating. And I mean, I know we always talk about how our students are like digital natives and stuff, but a lot of times they don't know how to do these types of things. They can make TikTok videos, but they don't necessarily know how to like force a copy of a Google slide deck or like share editing settings. So that kind of stuff, you do have to like walk them through a little bit, or there might be one or two kids in the group that can like do that for everybody, kind of show them how it's done. So that's fine. But so this will probably be one of their first activities that they do together. They'll put whatever group number they are. They tend to like forget what group number they are, so it's nice and gigantic on the slide. They're gonna put a picture of their book cover there. Again, some kids are like, what book am I reading? So all the visual reminders are great. And then they're gonna put their names in this box and whatever magical power they wish that they could have. So I put an example for myself. I wish that I was able to speak every language. Then they're gonna write down, you know, who has what job, who has what role. And so all these things are gonna stay there. If there's ever a question about who, you know, should be leading the discussion or whatever, it's right there. They've got their name. Then there is a slide that tells them how to take their slide from that class-wide Google Slides presentation that you needed to see so that you were able to see all of the breakout rooms working at one time. Like that does all need to be together. Once they are finished with that, then there are instructions for how to click on their own slide, file, download as a JPEG or a PNG file, and then add that file to their group slides, and they can just add it as a background. That's usually the easiest way, and it'll just fit right in there. Or they could just drop it in as an image. Doesn't really matter either way. But this is where they're gonna keep track of their completed work. These also will no longer be editable. Once it's saved as like a PNG or a JPEG, they're not gonna be able to type over it. So this will kind of hold them accountable for like how much work they're getting done during that breakout room time. And there are slots for all of these, you know, slides in that slide deck, and then in the little speaker notes section, it tells you which slide should go here. So if it's like the villain discussion or the helper discussion, the real event, the low point, secret, impact, reimagining the future, whatever. So all of that's there. So it's, you know, it's a little bit complex, but students will learn it fast. And as far as literature circles go, I think this is a really great way to keep everything organized from my point of view, so that I'm really able to see everybody's progress. Sometimes that has happened to me in the past with lit circle groups, is like they're meeting in class and like, I don't know, they seem to be talking about what they're supposed to be talking about, but I'm kind of like checking in with different groups and I haven't really seen their work, and then like a couple weeks in, kind of realized that like, oh, this group has like not done anything and they're really far behind, and it was sort of hard to like keep track of that because everybody had their own little packet, and you don't see it until the end when they turn it in. So this is a much better way to keep track of how kids are doing and groups are doing as you go. So you have like 11 discussion questions, and I think they're all really good. There's a couple cool ones, like what impact has this story had? Like this book, for example, Harry Potter, that was my reference point. What is the impact that this has had? Who's talking about it? Are there fandoms? Are people writing fan fiction? Are there a bunch of Tumblr posts about this? Are there Harry Potter Puppet Pals videos on YouTube based on this? Like, what is this book's reach, if anything? And I did check Tumblr for, just like posts about all of these books. I think the only one that I didn't find much about was Charlie Hernandez and the League of Shadows. So that one's gonna be a little bit harder to find, but like, are there book reviews of this book on YouTube? Where else on the internet are people talking about this? I just think that's a cool thing to find. And if you want, you can delete any of these before you get started, but this is all the stuff that we're working towards. And then that final question, the question that we really are working toward with all of this, how does this book help us reimagine the future? What does this book challenge about our notions of heroes or power or society or what's important in life or whatever? So that's what we're moving towards. And then I just offered them a couple of options for like a final project. So like, yes, they'll get graded, I guess, like as a group or whatever, on their group presentations and stuff like that, their group slides. And I don't know, if somebody really does nothing and gets a lot of complaints, I don't know, you can work with that kid. They probably already have a low grade anyway, so I don't know if it's worth punishing them in their group grade. I don't know. As you can tell, I'm not like huge on being a stickler about grading, especially this year. But then there is an individual final project. So then, this is where they'll get some individual points and not have to work in a group. So you could have everybody do this one. This was my original idea. So they're gonna write a literary analysis essay that answers the question, how does this book help us reimagine the future? Include at least 3 examples from the text and a specific situation in the real world that relates to the text. All of these texts do reflect something about the real world. They're all trying to say something either about a specific time in history or about society today, and you have to dig a little bit harder to figure out what that is compared to reading like a historical fiction novel, but they are all saying something about the real world. And so what is this book saying about how things could be? So these essays would be really kind of fun to read and write. Or if a kid is like me and enjoys just talking about that, they could make a video answering that question and like put it on Flipgrid. I'm a big Flipgrid fan. I also think it would be cool for them to do some projects that are like outward facing. So for example, write a fanfic story that stems from this book, include at least 2 of the original characters from the story, and write a new adventure for them. And then I would maybe give extra credit if they put it on like Wattpad or something and like contributed to this world of fan fiction about this story. Like, I think that would be really cool. And I know some of my students will choose that one and will do that. Or if they like YouTube type of stuff like me, they could create a book trailer or a book review. I've also included a little document in this folder for like how students can learn more about these books. And so I had to link like book reviews or book trailers for these, and there weren't always a ton of options for every single book. So like, YouTube could use more reviews and book trailers of these books. So a book trailer would be more like a commercial for the book, and the student, if they didn't want to be in the video, that would be okay. They could just like splice images together and make like this commercial. They could, overdub it or whatever and talk about what this book is about. Or if they wanted to do a book review, then they would be like sitting in front of the camera, and like talking about what they thought of the book, and here's a bit of a plot summary and, my thoughts about it, maybe avoid spoilers, whatever. So there are lots of examples of these online, and they probably watch them anyway. So, you can add even more options as well. So I think that takes us to the end of the unit. I'm going to literally be teaching this starting on Monday. So if you want to kind of just like follow along on Instagram, I'll, share a little bit in stories and stuff about how it's going. Then you can see how this goes for us. I would encourage you to try this just because I want to see more fantasy in classrooms. I just think it's sort of written off as like not an academic genre, and I think we could challenge that and use it to tap into kids' desire to read and desire to discuss and write and just be excited about books and challenge their thinking. So let me know what you think about this. I'm gonna link everything down below, of course, and maybe this is something that you could start planning for like next year. It definitely is hard to like jump right into it without planning how the kids are gonna get their books and stuff. The other thing that you could do is just allow students to choose any fantasy book that they want, anything that they can get their hands on, and they could just be in groups and like talk about their different books and kind of work together on that. Like I have done literature circles in that way. Just real quickly, I'll tell you about this. Like we read The Diary of Anne Frank a couple of years ago, so we read that together, and then they're always very interested in learning more about World War II, so we did like a novel study literature circle thing where they were just allowed to choose any book that they wanted that was set during World War II. It could be in America or Germany or France or Asia or wherever. It just had to be set during World War II, and they all chose the book that they felt like reading. And this was pre-COVID, so we would sit in our community circles and we would have, you know, a common question, and everybody would go around and say how their book deals with that particular question or, you know, aspect of World War II or whatever. And it was great. That was a great way to do literature circles. Maybe I'll make a whole nother video about that. I loved that unit. So anyway, you could maybe, you know, do fantasy in that way as well if it was really hard to get a hold of books for every student to read. Why is it so hard to get a hold of books? I feel like at a school, if you're like, hey, I need to buy 100 books for my class and they're gonna read these, then the school should just be like, okay, ordered, here are the books, they will be delivered to you. That's my fantasy. I'm gonna write a fantasy world where at a school you're allowed to just buy as many books as you want to buy. All right, anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope that you try these lit circles out with your students, and I would love, love, love to hear your thoughts about how it goes. So I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day. Bye.